This program is brought to you by Globals.
Defining moment ahead of the 2025 election in the East African nation of Tanzania, October 2025 marks a pivotal time for several African nations, including Tanzania, which is approaching its first post John Magufuli elections on October 29, 2025. This election could signal significant internal transformations reflecting broader global trends. Political analysts expressed concerns over fading political democracy, particularly in light of treason charges against Tundu Lissu, the chair of the main opposition party Chadema. President Samir Suluhu, fondly called as Mama Samir, is representing the ruling Chamacha Mapinduzi CCM party and will compete against 16 other candidates. Tanzania, of course, the outcome of this election is crucial, impacting Tanzania's economy, security, diplomatic relations, among others. Tanzania has adopted, it should be noted, a foreign policy that aligns with the Pan African vision focused on unity and collective progress. In today's multipolar world, where national interests often dictate diplomatic engagement, there is a pressing need to reassess the parameters or indicators of democracy in the 21st century. Geopolitical dynamics also call for a strategic shift from mere political persuasion to, of course, a politics of power and interest, especially strategically, as countries strive to enhance their strategic advantages both internally and at the global stage. Given Tanzania's strategic location as a gateway to both Africa and the world at large, careful attention to the electoral process is therefore essential to prevent polarization, especially along the political scope. Join our panel of experts this day on Global Insight as we decode or continue to explore the major indicators for the October 29, 2025 elections in the East African nation and of course the states involved. And this is Global Insight, of course, proposed to you by Globus. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. And now we are going to uncover the panel that will examine the defining moments for Tanzania as the country heads to the poll on the 29th of October 2025. Like we highlighted, many other countries in Africa are actually exercising this or will be exercising this democratic right in the month of October. But our focus this day is on the East African nation of Tanzania. Here with me in the studio, I will acknowledge the presence of Dr. Michael Dumancho, who is a researcher and civil society representing the Republic of Cameroon. It's a pleasure having you on Global Insight this day, Dr. Dumancho.
It's a pleasure to be here, Clarice, and to be able to converse with your them too, because that is also about what actually consulted about. You consult, people. We live in a very, very collaborative world whereby in doing research, We need to hook up with other people who actually are doing the same thing. And we grew in research. And that is actually what Africa needs today, you know. Africa needs to synergize effort. Africa needs to grow as a single person. Growing as a single person, you know, it is an African adage which says that if you want to go fast, go alone, and you have to want to go far, go in a group. And I think that that's what Africa needs today. We need to valorize Africa. We have gone past that era whereby we spend our time criticizing, only looking at the negative things about African nations. I think that it is time now we'll be able to sing the song of Africa, to say that we have potentials, and that Africa is also that you know, that fertile ground whereby we want to nurture and mature our own agriculture, nurture and mature our own expert scientists, nurture and mature our own health experts, nurture and mature our own humanism, as we will say. So I think it is important that we can start telling the story, and Global Insights, of course, is just doing the magic.
Absolutely, yeah. Bringing the world together to understand the world, particularly in the new world order. And that is why I focus this day. We are going to analyze elections in Tanzania, not as we used to do in the past, but then contextualizing with the happenings in the 21st century, actually asking if we should bring new definitions to the terms pertaining political democracy to suit the present multipolar world. Let's now go to Tanzania and also appreciate the presence of Michael Andi Dilili, PhD, Associate Professor, University of Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Karibu, sir.
Asante sana. Thanks for having me. And
Uh,
it's a pleasure for me to take part.
It's a pleasure for us to also have you represent Tanzania to give us the stakes on the ground as the country is gearing towards the DD October 29. I know it's it's campaign period, and very now candidates actually crisscrossing the various areas of the country, actually bringing explanation to their various manifestos and how they will practicalize a visa if voted after the elections date. Into the South African nation, we're being joined by Paseka Farumeli, PhD, UNISA academic and member for Pan-Africanism and Progress. Welcome to the program, Paseka.
Thank you very much, Clarice. I'm looking forward to this engagement. It's an exciting one, and I can see that my fellow panelists and colleagues are very excited to have this engagement. So I myself am also looking forward to us engaging on this subject matter. Thank you very much.
It is very imperative that we assemble as Africans to understand or to decode the realities of the African continent, looking at the political realities of Tanzania today. In the course of the program, we'll also be joined by Irina Sutova, who is researcher and IBAC expert on East Africa region. She'll be joining us from Russia. And we're going to go right away to the preliminary, getting a holistic analysis of the election atmosphere, or let me say the pre-election atmosphere in Tanzania with you, Professor Michael. Please, you're muted. I think.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry. I just wanted to say that, of course, the atmosphere is ready for the elections, and as you already know, there are 17 candidates, minus at least two of them potential candidates. So we are just listening to the manifestos and how they are canvassing, and waiting for the D-Day on October 29 to come and vote. But of course, the stakes are high because we have the ruling party, and then we also have 16 other parties, minus 2 who were unable for a lot of reasons to participate.
And according to you, what is so different with this 2025 elections from the past elections? I think that was in 2020 in Tanzania.
I think the biggest difference is that we have more parties participating in number, but the foremost rival party, which is Chadema, is unable to participate because it insisted on having reforms before elections. So I think that is what has changed, because in the previous 2 elections run up to this one, the foremost ruling party, opposition party participated. In this one, it won't be the case. So that is the change which is there.
Thank you so much. I will be coming back to you subsequently as we continue to decode the stakes ahead of the October 29 presidential elections in Tanzania. Holistically, from you, Paseka Faramali, what is your own perspective regarding the political sphere of Tanzania in come October 2029? Patterning the position of the ruling party, the CCM, and also the position of the main opposition party, Chadema, that, according to some pundit, is already being deprived.
Thank you, Clarice. What I've come to learn is that we have a big problem as the continent of Africa. But it is not just us, it's just that it is magnified when we speak of Africa and the problems that we have in Africa. In that quite a few countries in the continent still continue to say that they have a free and democratic nation, but in practice, it seems that it is far removed from being fair and democratic. Why I say this is because 2 of the strongest parties that might be in the opposition in Tanzania have been strategically removed for whatever reasons that were presented. But that means that the ruling party does not then get an opportunity to actually see if the people on the ground, the masses on the ground, actually support their ideas and ideologies in their numbers. So it is quite worrying. And I do not think that it is something that we want replicated the continent over. But I think that it is a lesson, even before the election has actually taken place. But I think that there is possibilities that we might find ourselves in a position in which we are going to learn huge lessons. One of the things that is a bit frustrating is that whenever you have opposition parties that are as or close to as big as the actual leading party, then you have instability and conflict that might arise. But this is just me saying that we need to be very careful about what we have to anticipate, how it might look like, and what might happen afterwards. I hope that it did speak to your question, Clarice. Thank you.
Is the preliminary question. We are going to enter detailedly to the complex questions to understand elections in the multipolar world, and then in a changing atmosphere. Now we are in a countdown to change in Tanzania, and with you, Dr. Dimancho. What, in your own opinion, probably are your thoughts on how the 2025 elections in Tanzania might affect the country at every level?
I think elections, especially presidential elections, are very, very big moments for a country, every country in the world. And I think Tanzania is not going to be left behind in this. They are looking forward to having an elections, and everybody always wishes for a peaceful elections, especially for a country like Tanzania. Remember that their first multi-party elections was conducted in 1994. And of course, since then, they have been looking forward to having real elections, real democracy. And I think democracy has been green. And one of the things that I think about the legacy of Tanzania, which they would not want to let down, is the memory of Julius Nyerere. All of us
Absolutely.
know about that monument. That is a historical monument, not just for Tanzania, but for Africa as a whole. We understand how Julius Nyerere fought for democracy, for the rule of law in that Tanzania. And it's we are very, very nostalgic about that role. You remember Julius Nyerere has even been pinned as to be canonized as a saint in the Catholic Church in Africa.
Yeah.
This is a very, very important step. And I think that Tanzanians are aware of this and they will not spoil that legacy that Julius Nyerere kept. A lot of people who talk in Africa today quote Julius Nyerere. And going down to Jakarta, Kaga, I mean, Kwete, I mean,
Yes.
so, I mean, we are looking down to Magufuli, of course, yesterday, that the memories are still fresh in our mind, and we regret his passing on so soon. Remember, someone had coined the kind of democracy that should be practiced in Africa, and he put that adjective under the name of Magufuli, and he called it the Magufulization of politics in Africa. And what did that mean? I'm talking about Lumumba, Patrice Lumumba, who,
Yes.
of course, is also a Pan-Africanist. And what did he mean by Magufulization of Africa? He explained this by saying that, by the way John Magufuli ruled Tanzania, he thinks that if all other African countries should copy, then there will be this sanctity of politics in Africa. This is the holiness of politics in Africa. Of course, one cannot be purely holy. We remember that those who are celebrated as saints started as bad people, and therefore we cannot say that anybody is pure. Magufuli, of course, had his own faults. But then, if we want to look at it from the positive and the majority part of his rule, we will understand that Magufuli, of course, set a good precedent, which, of course, Samia is supposed to follow suit and make sure that actually not to kill that legacy, but uphold it. Remember that one of the greatest things, which of course Barack Obama noted, was the fact that it is easier to receive a Nobel Peace Prize than to defend it. You know, when you receive it is easy, you do well on receive, but to defend it up to a desired end is always an issue. And you think Tanzanians are people who are peace-loving, and nobody will like it is often said that it is easy to start a conflict, especially electoral conflict, but it is very difficult to stop it. And we understand that Tanzanians are aware about this. Other countries in Africa too are aware about this. If we have gone past that era where people should look at us as those still in the dark ages who only resolve their problems through conflict, we think that conflicts now could be resolved on the table of negotiation, and Tanzanians are aware of that. We have about 17 candidates gone in for the election in Tanzania, which of course, this is a sign of democracy. I want to look at it positively, even though when I saw that, I condemned and I said that in a country like Tanzania, having 17 candidates running for presidential election, it is too much. People should spend time fixing the country than dividing it in. Because when you look at these rallies, you understand that most of the parties are sponsored behind by the invisible hands. And when you talk very much about the multipolar world, people are afraid of accepting others in order to bring in their own contribution to the world to make a world a better place.
And that is why it is imperative for Dr. Dimancher for us to look at elections, bringing together the new realities of the world, given that there is a visible global shift in politics and governance. I'll go back to Professor Michael in Tanzania, wanting now to highlight the position of the main opposition party, that is the Chadema, and the complexities following the candidacy. Now, we want to look at the reforms called by Tunde Lissu before elections are conducted in the country. In your own perspective as a citizen of Tanzania, can we say that was the right time for such reforms to be mended, or can we say it was some sort of I don't want to call it this way, but then I have no choice than to call it some of the political rhetorics that we often see from the opposition or politicians when a nation is heading to the polls?
Maybe let me put it this way. One cannot argue with the fact that there is always room for reforming a system,
Absolutely.
particularly if you are in a nation where the ruling party from the grassroots is so dominant. And for so many years that it has enacted the laws and it also governs the system. So the opposition is often suspicious that without reforms, which means they cannot win. And that's why they wanted reforms so as to make necessary changes to make it amenable and maybe friendly to the opposition as well. Because from their thinking, as we stand, the current setup favors the ruling opposition. From my side, I think maybe it was a question of timing because the reforms were being called during an election year. Now, that it brings about a dilemma. Do you postpone the elections or do you go with the reforms? If you don't do the reforms, which means now that creates we are in the situation that we are now. Personally, I would say reforms are important in any democracy because if things does not work, then you have to make necessary changes. But again, when do you have to make those changes? I think sometimes the timing is the key factor. Now, if we go back to the present time, because the elections will proceed, because we are talking about the ruling party and 16 other parties. So what we can say now is that those reforms can come at a time, and they need not be a destabilizing factor. That is from my perspective. We know one of the cherished values of Tanzania is peace and stability. That should not be tampered with. The elections will go ahead, but there has to be a time when you have to continue. After all, reforms are part of the bigger picture and an ongoing process. That is my take on the issue.
Which is quite imperative, and it leads us to the next question. I think it's going to be somehow a follow-up with you, Pasika formally, but because when you were talking in your introductory statement, you made mention about the fact that there is need for countries to respect democracy. But then I will want us, I will appreciate if you contextualize democracy, given that you're very versed with the present geopolitical contestation across the globe, and we mentioned in our preamble that Tanzania is the gateway not just for Africa but the global world. Now, with all the stakes here and underlining again by Professor Michael that the peace and stability are some of the tenets of President very dear to Tanzanians. How do you think we can now redefine the concepts of democracy you know, patterning the definition of political persuasion and politics of power and interest? I beg your pardon.
Thank you, Clarice. Within that context, I think democracy, which I don't think we've actually seen a fully fledged democracy until this day, whether from the continent or whether from the West itself, who preach democracy. But the idea of democracy is one where everyone has a voice, and the majority in that context are able to elect someone that they agree with, and thus that means that everyone has a voice in repetition. So what the logic is, it's primarily to make sure that you find yourself in a position where those who want to contest for positions are able to stand for them without anyone trying to stop them or without anything happening to them. As we've seen with a number of countries that we've worked with, overseas, specifically in the east, towards the east, where ideas and ideologies of others do not necessarily agree with the ideas and ideologies that the leaders would like to push, and those people easily get dismissed or they get erased in those specific situations. So going back to your question, the ideal definition of a democracy is a state in which everyone is free to be able to elect those who they want to elect. So, with using that definition in its most simplistic form, we look at the context of Tanzania and what is happening here. And I believe Prof did speak to it's so unfortunate that reform had to be presented in the same time period as the elections have to happen. Because what happens is that you now have two somewhat slightly different situations, but that require the same people to actually participate in. And now, what that means is that if you want to dismiss people, then you are given the perfect opportunity to say these are people who do not want to reform. We need to always think about that idea of reform, changing things that are the status quo, moving towards a specific target as a union. But when we look at this specific context, that means that if you are able to remove others in the time period where we are looking at reform, and that is a specific period where we have what we regard as a democratic election, then we have a big problem. We have a big problem because when we speak of the idea of a democratic election, a democratic state, we are looking at the ultimate form of freedom for me. But in this specific context, it becomes very difficult for me to make the argument. If anything, it looks very measured. It looks very measured in that the actual parties that you genuinely believe stand a chance to actually contest the leading party, the main party, the CCM. Those parties are the parties that for some reason or for one reason or another are the parties that are being eliminated. That is very problematic. I'm not sure because I do not know the context. I mean, as a person who lives there, I know things in theory from reading about Tanzania, but it is something that I think would make everyone a bit uneasy. I think even Prof would look at this specific situation from the point of view of saying it's difficult to make the argument that this is a coincidence, that these specific reforms are being presented towards a similar date, because ideologically I believe that those in politics do tend to know what others, what their oppositions are thinking, where they stand in specific context in terms of ideology. So now when we take that and then we put it in practice and we look at what is happening in Tanzania, I do make the argument that it might not be in its fullest form a form of a democratic election. And I do believe that the CCM will have a landslide win, especially if nothing happens between now and the elections. Because the actual genuine competition that I believe they have is non-existent at this point. And I do believe that it was strategically and systematically annihilated or removed from the coming elections. I hope that I did make sense when I said this, Clarice. Thank you.
Dr. Dimancher, you may want to throw more light on this particular aspect which Pasika just underlined at the moment, because it's very crucial for us to analyze this because we are actually looking at those defining moments or the stakes that will mark Tanzania's elections come October 29. When you follow news on other media outlets, you discover that the major debate is just on the fact that the main challenger is actually some sort of in a crossroad, as they cannot contest already this elections. Do you think that's where the bone of contention for Tanzania should be at this particular moment, that we're talking of a country that has recorded enormous economic growth under the leadership of Mama Samia, as fondly called in Tanzania, after taking over in 2021 from John Magufuli, who actually passed?
I think that we need to have now a different narrative about issues of elections. Uh, the excitement for change of leadership, yes, it is well understood. Uh, Democracy, yes, it is well understood. But of course, let Africans be able to come to terms about what kind of democracy actually is and where is it even practiced. Because when you even look at democracy the way it is was formulated in Greece, even the Greek themselves do not more even follow that same line of democratic rules as the philosophers actually postulated, which is actually, the yardstick for democracy in the world. America has even shown that they are worth more than a democratic country today. And I think that what I'm saying is that Africans in general and Tanzanians in particular should actually know what they are looking for. I remember there is a prelate in Cameroon who even said spending over 90 billion francs or 60 billion francs to organize elections. Sometimes people should just come to terms with the fact that sometimes that money is not necessary to spend on organizing kinds of elections. But we accept that change is a constant thing and that each and every person and everything in the world changes. But what do Tanzanians really want?
And that is where it is
Yes.
very important. It's
Yes.
the will of Tanzania,
Yeah.
the social contract that these candidates
Exactly.
actually
Have with
the population.
Tanzanians.
Yeah.
Exactly. What do they really want for themselves? And what leader do they think would transmit these goods into their desired wants? This is one of the things that we're looking at. Is it that angel coming from heaven who is spotless, who will come into actually salvage Tanzanians from, actually, we will say that every country has difficulties. But then I think one of the things that we should forget is that whether who wins, whether it's Mama Samia who wins, whether it's which other candidate that wins, Tanzanians get up the next morning as Tanzanians. And they should not forget that. And remember that when you perturb this peace that is supposed to reign, and all the money, Africa has been dubbed a country of wars and crisis. And who benefits from this crisis? Because the tendency is to actually push people, to lure people, to disrupt, to cause, to stir the storm in the teacup so that the country burns. But who benefits from this burning country?
And
You
that's
should
where the
know that
problematic lies.
Tanzanians need to know that it is not for their good. Even in what they call democracy, it is not for their good to cause crisis in order to change government. In negotiation is better than actually crisis. And you should know that when crisis starts, the people who benefit are not Tanzanians. I usually tell people in one of my major outings that when you cause crisis, and the UN, of course, which has never solved any problem in the world, any crisis in the world, that's what we have to be telling Africans, because at each moment they say the UN is coming, but they forget that the UN has never solved any crisis in Africa. When
It
tomorrow,
comes to diplomatic, it's just all about interest.
it's about interest, and that is where I'm coming to, Clarice.
Yes.
Because when there's a crisis and the UN send the security forces, the military, and whatsoever, Africans do not know that the security forces and all that are being paid by the money from their raw materials. The UN doesn't spend. The UN doesn't have money to spend on that. When the UN send actually a mission, a security mission to your country, you are paid. They are paid. Those security forces are paid by the money from their your natural resources. So this is what Africans need to know, that it is better to sort our issues within ourselves than to actually be coerced by other people. Because all of these things, we understand that democracy can actually be formulated the way we Africans want it. And we can do better. Because let me tell you, Clarice, the other day we were in Congo, and one of the things that people talked about Congo, if you do not go to on the ground, you will not understand that actually most of those things that people say is just to cause chaos about certain countries. And that you will find that the people outside the outside world, the international organization, what the image they have is the image of interest that they have about the country. It's not even a image of love to see the country in a democratic way. And there is this hypothesis that when you hear the international community condemn a leader very vehemently and seriously and constantly they know that that leader is doing something for their people. If you go online to read about Tanzania today, you'll be baffled by what you see. But what I know is that that lady Samia Suluhu is at least doing her best. She took up from Magufuli, and I'm sure that quite there are a lot of things that she needs to put in place for the country to take up, and she has been doing in terms of agriculture, in terms of education, in terms of other areas, which we have to appreciate. But the point is, they are there. But the tendency we have is that we always want to look at the bleak picture of the country, because African hardly appreciate their own. They keep on appreciating that democracy and rule of law, good governance is only across the continent. But it is here. Our own people show us. But because we do not believe in our own, just like the Bibika will say that we know you and we know where you come from, we know your parents, and nothing good can come from you. And I was of this opinion during the period of Magufuli, of the opinion that Magufuli actually, like the successor, actually is portraying something that is different in Africa. Because in effect, when you talked about John Magufuli, you didn't actually liken him to the mini tribes that you had in Tanzania. When you talk about John Magufuli, you just knew that he was a Tanzanian. Unlike the narrative where people have, when you call, for example, Paul Biya of Cameroon, they will tell that he is of the Bully tribe of here, and that he is from the center of Cameroon. And what is that? That is already disintegrating the country. And therefore, a leader, once you become a leader, you become a microcosm of your people. You become that single whole that represents the people of a mighty whole. And therefore, Clarice, usually I talk too much. Yes.
Absolutely not talking too much, but actually talking constructively, Dr. Dimancho, just to highlight that the peculiarity of Tanzania, which many people have actually applauded, that Zanzibar is also a semi-autonomous state in Tanzania, with a president. And I would love that Professor Michael actually throws more light on this. Now that we have set the preamble, we have contextualized our discourse to look at the political scope of Tanzania in a different perspective. What do you think are those stakes or indicators that should be underlined in Tanzania before the 29th of October presidential elections that will put more impetus in the internal policies and even the governance system in Tanzania?
I think when we are talking about what has been done, a lot has been done up to this point. And I don't think what can happen between now and the 29th can change that much. Because we are talking about a ruling party that has been there since independence, that has been spearheading development from the time of Ujamaa, that is an African brand of socialism that Tanzania pursued. And then it also oversaw the country through the crisis of the 1980s until the Bretton Woods institutions came with their own medicine and stuff like that, forcing the country to liberalize so many things, including politics, the economics, and also the media. So if we go to the 20s, starting from 2000 upwards, up to now we're talking about 2025. Yes. You see, a lot has been done, and we cannot deny that. And I don't think there is much in terms of policy that can be done to sidetrack the country from the achievement that it has made so far. I think the most important thing, even the contestants who are on the list, what they are supposed to do is to try to provide alternatives. Because it's not like the current government has not done much. A lot has been done. We are talking about which is a continuation from where Magufuli left. You can talk about the roads, you can talk about infrastructure, you can talk about taking service to the people, and a lot of those things. So I think what matters, I think somebody has already said that under the present conditions, I don't think there's any party that is competitive enough to unseat the ruling party. What I can encourage them is to provide alternative policies which the ruling party can listen to and also adopt even as it wins to continue with the seat of government. Because I know for a fact that the ruling party does not just simply ignore the suggestions from other political parties. Because even some of the things that are being done, it is because after listening and seeing what alternatives are there and they're being done there. Simply put, I don't think much will change from now to the 29th. What we have to do is to listen carefully to what the alternative voices, if they are strong enough, and then what they say can be accommodated. Because I don't think personally there is a party that is going to change the status quo. Because the ruling party has done a lot, and I don't think there's a viable opposition presently from the 16 which can unseat it. Because I think one of the things people forget is that you can have a party, but you might not have the mass appeal at the grassroots. And that is one of the things people often forget, that the ruling party over the years has galvanized and built a strong foundation in the rural areas. You can, in the urban centers, sometimes you can find it, there are strongholds for political positions. But in the rural areas, you find that the ruling party has entrenched itself, and that is the best.
Cameroon.
Yes, please, you can proceed.
Yes, let me stay with you. You said something very pertinent, and I would love that you throw more light on it. Now, I quite remember during a research mission recently in Congo Brazzaville, a staunch opposition in that country highlighted that in spite of the challenges of this country, what this country actually enjoys is peace. And I think that peace is very important for foreign direct investment. It is important for a whole lot of development happening across. But now when you go across to see, like I already highlighted, you discover that the information regarding Tanzania, you see reports about Mama Samia being becoming repressive, and secondly, debates are focused on the fact that opposition has been, sidelined and questioning the plurality of political parties in the East African nation. With this already on the ground, what do you think are the right, the right way to go towards ensuring that there is no such thing like political polarization in the East African nation of Tanzania?
As someone is to say, I think there's still room for dialogue, because that's the most important thing. Because if you close the doors, then people feel frustrated. But if you can continue dialogue, because the 29th is just one day, we will vote, and then they will announce the leader. But then the nation has to continue. And I think in this dialogue, first and foremost, we need to make sure that even after the polls, we continue talking. So that even eventually, when we have to carry out whatever necessary, that can change the destiny or improve the destiny of the country, they can continue. But I think the most important thing is continuing dialogue. Because sometimes, even when you talk about repression, who is saying there's repression? You see, I'm not denying, but I'm just saying who is saying that. Because sometimes and who is behind it. So those are sensitive issues. But if dialogue continues, that will be more important, because it can help safeguard the peace and stability that this country has enjoyed. Because when you exclude people and you close the doors, which means there will be no dialogue, that leads to frustration. So I think the most important thing is to try to explore how even those who have been shut out of the elections presently can talk and air their views. And then if eventually they can reach a decision regarding how they can go forward by addressing those concerns and bringing about necessary change. But when you talk about now and the 29th, I think there's very little time. I think we just have to make sure that we have a peaceful election. And then after that, see what we can do to make sure that we continue enjoying the peace that we have enjoyed since 1961 for Tanganyika and 1964 for the United Republic of Tanzania.
Which is very imperative, and to note that the UPDP's candidate in the person of Twalibu Katiki has actually underlined that shifting his campaign strategy to just focus on the manifesto rather than pointing out the weaknesses of other contenders or challenges. I think this is already something that it's quite commendable for the politicians across Tanzania, and it shows some sort of political maturity. Can we attain that level, Paseka formally, to note that candidates like different from what is happening in other countries, focusing on the manifestos and analyzing ways to bring forth these new changes to the political sphere of Tanzania instead of criticizing rivals?
Yes, that should be the way forward. I think it's the most logical way forward. Why I argue that is because we there's this thing that I always emphasize or I call out, and I call it the Americanization of South African politics. And now in this context, I would call it the Americanization of African politics, where you have where we have our politicians who are arguing against their opposition. Instead of presenting their solutions and suggestions on how to take their different countries forward. And that is where the problem is. Because at the end of the day, if you focus on your manifesto and what you've been wanting to do, then you can actually be able to have a blueprint for the future, not actually be able aiming to destroy fellow Africans and to make them look like they are the problem of the country's reality. That is something that is very key. So I think that that is actually a great way to go forward, and I hope that it will be implemented fully. But also, I will continue to critique the fact that this seems very intentional to try and dismiss those who might dismantle the governing power that has been there since independence. So I think that is something that we cannot just push to the side. In all honesty, I do follow some of the ideas that the current president has, how they believe that the government can move forward, and specifically the country, and the position that she has taken. But I also do need to emphasize that if you have great ideas, the people will vote for you. You do not need to find yourself in a position in which the people who are against you have to be dismissed in a strategic way. That I think is very important and it is very key, because when you are a great leader, you do not need to panic and rethink or think about what is going to happen to me moving forward. Am my opposition going to contest everything and anything that I do or say? So that is very key. But I do emphasize the fact that from an observational point of view, I do like some of these ideas, and I do support the idea of pushing a manifesto, of pushing a specific manifesto and ideas instead of pushing against those who oppose you and your ideas. Thank you, Clarice.
I will stay with you, Paseka Faramali. Let's try to
Yes.
see how do you think, because now arrest and charge for treason has actually attracted some sort of criticisms across Tanzania, and it has been largely interpreted as a way for the ruling party to sideline the main opposition challenger. So now I quite remember this was during the the presidency of Jakaya Kikwete, and according to some sources, he used a lot of diplomacy with the opposition in the country, or some sort of subtle diplomacy. Let's try to understand with you some of those ways or parameters which you think that President Samir or any other politician who holds a baton of command in the country can maneuver to ensure that there are no, misinterpretations towards decisions pertaining the opposition candidates, because now we know treason is actually something that seems very heavy as per the definitions of the states.
It is going to be very difficult, Clarice. It is borderline impossible, because that means that we'd have to be very ignorant if we are going to say that there is no coalition between, or correspondence between the upcoming elections and Tundu being charged with treason. We would be very ignorant if we say that these two things do not have a rapport with one another. They do not have any relationship. So I think that before the election, I don't know what other possibilities, but I believe Prof did point out that it is less likely for this to happen. But I think, in all honesty, for us to have a situation in which people are going to say this is a free and fair election, we will need to find ourselves in a position where the current president is able to say, I will nullify and I will dismiss the current charges against these particular people. Because it is very difficult to say that it's a coincidence that the two major oppositions, or the closest oppositions, are the most problematic ones, which whereby one has to be charged with treason and etc. So it is very difficult for me to make the argument that we can say that there is fairness in this kind of situation. And that is why I emphasize the fact that I've seen the current leader in action, and I am very happy with a lot of things that she has done. But I do need to emphasize a lot of the time that when you dismiss your biggest opposition, people who actually stand a chance of contesting you in the election, then that means that the election itself is not free and fair. And these specific ideas of what we regard as democracy, and I think the colleague in the studio did emphasize that what we regard as democracy is not what the Greeks themselves initially conceptualized, but in practice, what we do see in this day and age as what we regard as democracy, to elect a specific leader, the norms that we are seeing currently in Tanzania are not those that we can say are a part of what we regard as a democratic election. And as I said, I do believe that the current leader has potential to actually succeed without having to rely on tactics that I think I regard as problematic, Clarice. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Paseka. And to those of you just tuning in, this is Global Insight on your Pan African television, and of course proposed to you by Globus. And today we are analyzing the stakes ahead of the 2025 elections in Tanzania. To note that Samir is contesting for the first time as president, and she represents the first female president in the East African nation who took over when then President John Magufuli passed, as she was the vice president then. So today, or this era, she is contesting, and it brings us now to the aspect of gender in leadership with you, Dr. Dimancho. I quite remember in a discussion with an expert of international relations and diplomacy, she highlighted that when you look at it critically, when Angela Merkel was no longer the Chancellor of Germany, war broke out in Europe. And now it brings us again to the leadership, gender equality in leadership? And if do you think Samir can lead Tanzania to more successes in terms of diplomatic successes, economic successes, and development that will improve the livelihoods of the Tanzanians?
Of course, I think that women have proven to be actually the lifesavers, political lifesavers in countries around the world. When you look at the leadership role that Salif Johnson held in Liberia, and of course, at that very particular moment where Liberia was almost sinking, and I know politically the analysis, of course, about the coming of Celine Johnson to power in Liberia, it was very, very complicated because, you know, Liberia was coming out of war, and the Rebel men were almost not there in Liberia because many had been killed, many had run out of the country, and women had now taken the power because women are always there. This is one of the things we should celebrate about women, is that the women are always there in matter what, because why the men run away for their lives, the women, they remain with the children, they remain with the earth, they remain with the country, and they remain with life, being with life. So I think coming out from Liberia and getting to Tanzania now with Samia, I think she has proven her worth. Of course, by just being the vice president of John Magufuli, I think that was something just more than saying that John Magufuli had a vice president. That was what I could call an iron lady at that particular time, being the vice president and taking over power with the continuity, because many had feared that taking power halfway, especially with the person of Magufuli, the country Tanzania was going to go on fire because they didn't believe that she was going to actually wear the shoe of John Magufuli. Remember that, I'm happy to see that many opposition parties have risen up. Of course, during the period of John Magufuli, the opposition was almost lame. It was almost inexistent. I mean, I'm talking about the strength of the opposition. And why? And the analysis of this I did, even during the period of Magufuli, was that when you are a leader, when you are a visionary leader, and you are a leader who solves matter, who solves the problems of your country, the opposition have very little to do in your country. This is one of the things that I saw in Tanzania. I mean, that was the school of thought that I shared in Tanzania, that during the period of Magufuli, the opposition had very little to criticize. And therefore, the opposition, was almost inexistent in terms of opposition. But rising now, of course, about 17 of them going for election, and who are tackling Samia, who actually is going in for the election. I think that we have to look at that as a mother who actually has realized the desire, has realized, the urge of the people, the wants of the people to be able to continue with the legacy in terms of agriculture, in terms of technology, in terms of education, health. I mean, we have been watching that, and a lot of people have been able to comment on what she has done. Not only a continuation of John Magufuli, she has even formulated new programs for Tanzania, which we must laud and we must applaud. And I think that if there is this overwhelming, let me say overwhelming support for her, it is because people have seen what she can be able to do as a woman. And we are coming out from that period whereby people thought that the woman had a secondary role. And now the issue of feminism now comes in. This is what we could celebrate as feminism. Feminism is not just about fighting to who is who or who is upper, who is not. Feminism is also about the intelligence. It's also about technology. It's also about being a technocrat in what you are doing. And I think that she's able to prove this, because I'm happy that we have people here who Pan-African is here. One of the papers I wrote was on Black consciousness.
Yes.
And one of the aspects of Black consciousness is feminism. When we talk about negritude, when we talk about Pan-Africanism, when we talk about Black consciousness, as was celebrated in South Africa, I'm happy that we have a panelist from South Africa with
Yes.
Steve Biko. Of course, I'm longing to come to South Africa to leave the legacy of Steve Biko in South Africa. And I'm happy that recently I hear a court case that the children brought up about his death. And I hope that they should be able to pay reparation to the family. I think when we talk about Black consciousness, it is also about feminism, because the rising of women at that particular moment where they thought that women were supposed to have the secondary role is now women are proving that they too can be worth something. And we are seeing it with Samia. And I know, of course, I'm not a prophet. Of course, from the trends, from the studies that we are seeing, she is having quite some support that is cropping up for her in Tanzania. And we should give a woman a chance. It is not just inspiring the women in Tanzania, it is inspiring the women all of Africa. And I see that many other women are rising up now and getting into politics.
Absolutely, very imperative because while talking, it was during an interview. I remember Samir underlining that it's actually a challenge when she was asked, like, how do you feel being the president of for Tanzania? And she said, I never imagined that I will be on this seat. And it's even more challenging because Tanzania, according to her, has 120, ethnic groups, and there are still people in the country with the notion of that the place of a woman should be relegated.
That's right.
And I think it's again a candidacy for 2025 set a litmus test for the the growth of women or intercession of women in the political sphere or even in positions of leadership. And it brings us to this question: the place of the youth, particularly as the nation braces for these historic or decisive elections. With you, Professor Micah, what is the perception of youth in Tanzania as the campaign atmosphere is going on? Can we say that there was an increase in the number of young people expressing the desire to cast their ballots, be it for the first time or second time?
I think it's very subjective because we don't have the figures. But what we can say is that if you look at, for example, the ruling party CCM, they have a large base of youth, and they also the opposition party, which is unfortunately is not going to take place. They also have a large body of youth. Now, what we need to consider here is that what do the parties have in the manifesto to offer to the youth? Because presently, as we speak, I think there is a need to continue creating job opportunities for the youth. I think that is something that is going to bring them and to encourage them to continue participating in the elections. And because if you look at the education environment, I think the country has harnessed its pool, and what those people taking part in the elections have to consider is to make sure to highlight what they are going to do for the youth. I think the ruling party is trying to do that, and some opposition parties are trying to do that. But I would even go further. Instead of just looking at what the ruling party can do, the ruling party should also listen to the alternative voices that the opposition parties are raising, even those which are not participating in the elections, regarding what they can do for the youth. And then that should be carried on board. Because at the end of the day, whoever comes into power after August 29, there is a need to address the youth concern. After all, they are the future of this country. After all, they are the guardians of our peace and stability that we have enjoyed thus far. So that should be first and foremost. Because even when you're talking about creating, building infrastructure, creating jobs, at the end of the day, they are supposed to cater for the youth. I think it should be a strategic area for all the parties which are vying in these elections and those which are not taking part to consider. Thank you.
Very imperative, considering the position of the youth and ensuring that it is imperative for them to underline the areas of interest for the vibrant young population in Africa, in Tanzania. And with you, Pasika Faramali, I want us to analyze the aspect of, the economic implications or the aspirations per this elections. Professor Michael just highlighted the need for more opportunities for the youth. And we know that Tanzania itself is a touristic hub or destination. So now, in the economic implications of this, what are, in your opinion, some of those predictions or indicators for how the outcome of the 2025 elections could impact the country's economy in its economic global standing?
Thank you, Clarice. I think there is something that we all agree on the panel. The idea that the current leadership or the potential future leadership is leadership that has a lot of potential that might lead Tanzania. And I think it's a very likable leadership that might lead Tanzania somewhere. I think one of the core things that you spoke to is the idea of tourism that Tanzania has. I think a lot of us in South Africa, every time we go to Tanzania, is specifically for those reasons, for us to be able to tour and whatnot. But one of the key things that need to happen is that there needs to be diversity. In a continent with the youngest population in the world, we need to be able to come up with diverse ways in order for us to be able to attract and create capital. In order for us to be able to have these diversified businesses that these youths can partake in. Because one of the problematic things that have happened is that we have a very young population, but that population remains unemployed and it does not work. And if you have a young population that might have great ideas, even in the political sphere, but you are not enabling them to be able to participate, it means that if anything, you are acting against the interest of the country themselves. So I think that there is huge potential for Tanzania. I think there's a huge future, not just in tourism, but in the country itself, being able to self-sustain, to become better and move forward. I think that there's a lot that can happen, but we will need a settled population that aims towards a similar direction, which is less likely. I do understand that it's less likely because it is very difficult to get people to aim at a common idea. We've seen how that has made countries like China, Japan, South Korea, Russia, some European countries like Switzerland, where you have a common idea of what is right and this is the way forward. But because now we find ourselves in a position where we have so many different ideas and ideologies. There is no sense of indoctrination that happens to the masses. We find ourselves in conflicting positions, and because of that, that is why we have these different parties who have different ideas on how to take the country forward. If people buy into an idea that is very plausible and very probable to lead the country in the right place, specifically socio-economically, then I think that we can have a constantly developing economy, specifically in the context of Tanzania. And I think it is very probable and it's very likely. So yes, yes, Clarice. I think if we can just follow these ways, and especially with this leadership that I think we all believe is going to, the CCM leadership is going to have a free victory in the coming elections. I think that we can emphasize the fact that if these ideas can get bought into without a lot of conflict, quoting the countries that I spoke to earlier on, then we might see a lot moving forward, specifically for the youth. As I said, I feel like Africa is underusing the power of youth that it has because older generations and older people are still remaining and forcing to stay in power, not just in politics, but in other disciplines. I thank you, Clarice.
Thank you. And if you're just joining in, this is Global Insight. You are most welcome. According to you, what is that defining moment or what are the stakes marking the upcoming elections in Tanzania as the nation will go to the poll on the 29th of October 2025? What is the role of the political contenders? What is the role, especially of the independent electoral commission in ensuring that the status quo of the nation is preserved, in ensuring peaceful, transparent, and free elections. And I come to you, Dr. Dimancho. You are also a civil society, and it is imperative that we highlight the place of the civil society in ensuring that the elections actually conducted well, and that the electoral commission delivers just as it is expected to do.
Yes, we as a civil society leader, I usually tell people that actually conducting free and fair elections is a political will of the government in place. Why do I say so? You understand, Clarice, that the issues of electoral commissions are only in Africa. When you go to France, there is no independent electoral commission. You know, elections are organized by the territorial administration. When you go to the United States, it is the same thing. When you go to Europe as a whole, there is nothing like independent electoral commissions. But because of the goodwill of the government, elections are organized in a free and fair manner. And therefore, I usually say it takes the goodwill. And I say that elections are rigged before the elections day.
Can we understand better?
Okay. The issue is, when you organize election, when you plan elections, and first of all, you discourage or you do not put feasible means for people to register and vote, you are rigging elections. When people are not really able to register, do you know that already you are rigging elections? You are. Secondly, because we have people who come on election day and they shout and the civil society over there, political parties, the government has done this. But the process to elections, what have they been doing to make sure that citizens register and vote? Or do they just want to clamor for a rigging of elections on the elections day? Elections are rigged before the elections day. Secondly, when the government attack opposition leaders and do not give them accessibility to, or maybe the opportunity to be able to practice and exercise their political rights, it is rigging elections. Of course, we have had many occasions. Of course, we can also talk about the issue of Tanzania, where you have the main opposition leader, Tondo, of course, who is getting into, well, I want to actually get to know exactly for what purpose he is actually being arbitrarily arrested. I want to say arbitrarily because there are a lot of been condemnation about the arrest. So you see, if this is confirmed to be that the government has tracked and is tagging Mr. Tondo, who will say that the government is rigging elections. Because when you disqualify unjustly opposition parties, you are rigging an elections.
But treason is something that is punishable by law.
By law, of course, it is. It means that actually there is something that he did that actually should, call for this kind of punishment. So there are a lot of mechanisms towards elections that you think that the government could have already even rigged the election before election day. So elections are rigged before and after elections, not on elections day. Elections day is just a culmination of what happened during the period of registration and all of those. And therefore, everybody seems to be implicated in the matter of the process towards the election day. The civil society, the religious leaders, the political leaders, I mean, the government itself, everybody is supposed to be implicated, even when it comes to the documents that you must possess to register for elections. If those documents are actually not being established for the citizens, it means that there is a way of rigging. That's another way of rigging elections. And we have had that in many other countries, where people cry foul and say they register or they have this identity card and they're not able to have, so they are not ready to register. And some people even cry foul to say that there is this actually plan of putting some people out of a registrar process by not delivering or establishing a national identity card so that they can register. So there are a lot of mechanisms into this. And the role of the civil society in every country is very, very fundamental, because a civil society activist is a whistleblower. And that is why in every country, we have always advocated that there should be civil society activists. But it's just that the role of the civil society has been misunderstood by so many people. A civil society is supposed to be somebody, an activist is supposed to be somebody who is not partisan. He is, as I call it, is a whistleblower. Whether it is from the left or from the right and it's something wrong, you blow the whistle.
Actually, a neutral
A
body.
neutral body. That is the rule of the civil society. But we have realized that in most countries in the world, the civil society leverage their leadership role for political or economic gains. And now they get implicated or they get too partisan in what is happening in the country. And that is why when they start tracking them down because of their role, they start complaining and saying that the government is autocratic, the government is dictatorship, and there are arbitrary arrests and all of that. Meanwhile, they have put themselves into it. Secondly, Clarice, much of the evil of external intervention that we have in most countries is being brought by civil society activists, because they go into alliance with foreigners. And what happened? The foreigners that come in through them. You have civil society activists who only have their offices in their suitcases. They do not have offices, and they are working with external bodies to destabilize their country of origin because of
political. It is imperative to check information.
Exactly, it's very, very important. And therefore, when the government starts checking the information, now they say that there is censorship, there is cracking down on civil society, there's cracking down. You remember that the government, the president of a republic, in the first place in every country, one of the first rules of the president of a republic is to ensure the territorial integrity of the country.
Absolutely.
This is the first person, this is the first political or the first general of the country, is to ensure the territorial integrity of the country. And therefore, when he sees that the borders are porous, he has to close them. When he sees that the political activism is not helping the country and that they are letting in actually the external forces to destabilize the country, it is a rule of the president of the republic to be able to crack down on it. And therefore, when you start cracking down because you want to ensure the peace and serenity of the people of the country, people start talking about how they are cracking down on them. So I think that exactly, most civil society do not know that they need formation in order to actually work as civil society activists. They need a lot of formation, and that is what we have been engaged in doing, that informing civil society to know their role. Because if you do not know their role, you will always have this tendency of going out of their calling because of your personal gain, or because of what Francois Bayard, I've also called Francois Bayard in his book L'État en Afrique, la politique du vent. You always going for that issue of the belly politics, the belly civil society activism, and all of that, which of course any country would not accept that. Even the United States of America, they will not accept that. They will deport you.
Absolutely. And I think it is imperative, like I always say, ladies and gentlemen, that this platform comes to widen the horizons for people to be able to have constructive analysis to the problems happening, not ignoring some of the deliberate acts which we can see. If there are proof or tangible proof to it, and that is the role of the journalist, to inform constructively and not to incite a population against its government, because understanding that there is need to protect the security of the state and its integrity at every level, it will push us to know how to navigate or call government's action if they're actually derailing. And we want to contextualize this aspect of the civil society with you, Professor Michael. What is the situation of the civil society in Tanzania, and what are they alluding for the atmosphere, the elections atmosphere, and particularly to the position of the main opposition challenger who is not contesting these decisive polls?
When you talk about the civic society in Tanzania, it is multi-layered. For example, when you look at the women, they have their own organizations. When you look at the youth, they have their own organizations. And then some of which are affiliated to the party, for example, the ruling CM, and also Chadema, they have their youth wing, which are very strong. But there are also other members of the civil society. So in Tanzania, the Catholic Church is very strong. And oftentimes, from time to time, statements which are not always, sometimes they criticize the government, but they issue them. And also, there are also other organizations. I think that's why sometimes they come into trouble with the law. Other religious bodies besides the Catholic Church. And also, you also have journalist association led by the Media Council of Tanzania, which also speak to try to make sure that the journalists operate and abide by the law, and also they act with responsibility. So when you talk about the civic society, just the political parties is just one thing. They are multi-layered, and there are many either religious, non-religious, but they are there. And that's why when the political parties, they're selling their manifestos, they need to reach out to these groups, because they know that if they try to cheat them, then they expose them. And so we can safely say that there are many groups operating in Tanzania which can be dubbed the civic society. Thank you.
And looking at this, it brings us now to the diplomatic standing of the country. And with you, Paseka Faramali, when we in our preamble today, we highlighted the fact that in 2025, Tanzania had a shift in its foreign policy, where President Samir underlined that it is imperative to define a foreign policy that aligns with the dictates of Pan-Africanism, and I think to a greater extent it aligns with the new the wind of change that is blowing across the African continent, contextualizing policies to be able to benefit from the the philosophies or ideologies of globalization or even international cooperation. And now we want to look at Tanzania standing at the international level with its other neighbors. So what can you allude as per the decision of Tanzania to define a new foreign policy that highly aligns with the dictates of Pan-Africanism?
Thank you, Clarice. I think that that is very key, right, to our current reality. And I think with us as the panelists here, we believe in, to an extent, we do not necessarily have to all be Pan-Africanist, but we do dictate that some of these ideas of Pan-Africanism are things that we align with. And I think when you have leaders who align clearly with Pan-Africanism, then we could actually see a future for the continent of Africa. One of the frustrating things that we've had to deal with as Pan-Africanist scholars, decolonial scholars, and things of that nature, is these nationalistic leaders that are not willing to align to something that could be seen as a Pan-African continent. And I do understand that development is such a difficult thing in the continent because the levels of development are not the same throughout the continent. However, ideas of Pan-Africanism are the only solution I think we have as a continent for us to see liberation and for us to move forward. And when you have leaders who genuinely seem to be believing in these ideas, I think you are now moving towards an idea or towards a direction of us seeing the continent liberated. I do understand that a lot of leaders are struggling with this idea of losing power or giving away power. And that is why they'd rather align themselves to ideas and ideologies of nationalism. But that does not liberate the people of that specific country, nor does it liberate the people of this continent. So, in my hope, what I'm hoping to see is not just lip service, not just ideas being shared, but something that is in practice. I know it's a far-fetched dream, but we need to find ourselves in a continent that is visa-less, visa-less. in a sense that it should be so easy for me as a member of the continent to move from here, go to Cameroon, go to Tanzania, go to Kenya without having to do visas. This does not mean that we have a borderless continent, because I've seen that people have started to problematize the ideas and ideologies of a borderless continent. But this means that we would have a free route to be able to move throughout the continent, even if we need to be tracked where we were the last time we were seen, what were we doing at some point. It's not really a problem for me, because even Europe in itself still follows those ideas, as much as it has made things a lot easier from a socio-economic point of view. I do understand that we are seeing a digression from what it was to what we are currently seeing, where a lot of countries are pushing towards their neighbors leaving their own countries. We see it in Spain, specifically we see it in the UK, and I think it is the influence of the USA. But I think that Africa still has a lot to do, and we can only benefit from leaders who are Pan-Africanist in nature, who believe in these ideas that we believe in, who share common ideas that we share. And if that is something that the leader is willing to do, I think it can only be a net positive for us as a continent, and not just limited to right now, but to the future as well. But as I said, as much as I support this, but if we are going to call something a democracy, a democratic election, we need to call it, we need to see it in action. And we need to problematize when we start seeing problematic symptoms. If you are going to call it a democracy, you need to practice. But if it is not, if you're a good leader and we think you're a good leader and you're not going to have a democracy, then we will still support you. But do not try to sell us an idea of a democratic election when there is circumstance that has led to some people who might contest you being regarded as terrorists. So it is a bit problematic. I thank you, Clarice.
Grammatica Paseka formally, but contextualizing it will help us to better understand the stakes on the ground, and which is quite imperative in this discourse of today, discussing ways on how to see that in spite the uncertainties or the challenges facing the political atmosphere of Tanzania, as campaigns continue to run across the country ahead of the October 29 elections, to ensure that there are no plans or instances of political polarization that can bring the country into ruins, and that is what we are actually trying to avert in this discussions. And with you, Dr. Dimancho, want to dwell more still on the aspect of the foreign policy of Pan-Africanism. We recall that Julius Nyerere actually advocated for this Pan-African ideology, preaching unity. And we see Samir in her presidency highlighting or redefining a foreign policy that embraces this Pan-Africanism. And we know that Tanzania stands as a trade route across the East African region, even across the African continent, and both to the global world at large. So how is this foreign policy surely, if implemented still practically, how can it boast regional trade within the East African community, and also under the historic continental free trade area?
Clarice, most recently, in the 20th century, we started talking about globalization.
Yes.
And one of the things, the ideas of globalization, of course, was that countries should come to a world stage, to an arena, and collaborate. And coming to collaborate means that you are coming with something to the world market, to this central arena to collaborate. That is globalization. You give and you take. And one of the questions that I often ask Africans is, what are they bringing to the world market? Because if you do not have anything to compete with in the world market, you will continue to be what they call a reservoir. And there is no way in which you can grow if you only receive. You can only grow from, most importantly, from what you produce. You can only grow from what actually you consume. And when you produce, especially things that you do not consume, you cannot grow. So you realize most Africans have misplaced priorities in their growth and in their production. We talked about Pan-Africanism, and of course, and you even made mention of multipolar world. A multipolar world is also in the light of Pan-African, a world of global market, a world of collaboration, a world of cooperation, whereby the world, the decisions in the world is not just taken from a single country called a powerful country, for example, America. And in that case, now we're talking about unipolar world. We are talking about a world where each and every country will be able to give a decision according to what it offers to the world. And it is very, very important. Remember, there is also a narrative I'm coming out with, which I call the economic identity of Africa.
Absolutely.
And it is gaining a lot of grounds. It's a concept that I'm bringing up, whereby I ask myself, Pan-Africanist for so long, starting from W.E. Du Bois, going down to the negritude activists, Seda Senghor, Seda, yes, the negritude activists, Senghor and the rest, and going down to even those who are Afrocentrism, those of black consciousness, and most people, and even the activism of black is beautiful and all of those. What is all that? And I question it. I say, we keep on celebrating the cultural identity. We keep on talking about how black is beautiful. And so what? And I'm bringing up this new narrative to talk about the economic identity of Africans. This one will get into another part of our plan.
Enter the political discourse of politicians, not just in Tanzania, but Africa, to ensure this continuity of Pan-Africanism that brings about development economically.
Of course, my concept is that anybody who has the economy, his culture is respected. Anybody who has the economic power has the cultural strength. You do not need to sing about culture. You just need to valorize yourself economically, and you inadvertently you find that your identity is respected. You will not hear America keep on talking about identity. You will not hear Europe talk about identity, but you hear them talking about agriculture. You hear them talking about engineering. You hear them talking about maybe a lot of things that actually buttress their economy. And one of the things that I got to say, we are sitting on gold and begging for whatsoever elsewhere. And that if we should harness all of these riches of Africa, and Africans, if Tanzania has this, Cameroon has that, South Africa has this, other countries in Africa, we bring this thing together and work in the synergy. We will be building the economic identity. Even the climate that we have is an asset that we need to use and be able to leverage for the economic growth of Africa. The forests that we have, the mineral resources that we have, we can be able to use that to boost our identity. And this is the new concept about giving Africa that new strength that needs to be respected, and that tomorrow, when we are going to the global market, we will not be going there at the level of solidarity, but we'll be going to the global market at the level of authority. This is actually a concept that I'm bringing about. And you were asking about actually this concept of external relations. Of course, external relation is built on the power of what you have. External relation is not built only on politics, it is also built, and most importantly, on the economy. Because countries will come to collaborate with you according to what you have. Remember, we say that in diplomacy, there are no permanent enemies and there are no permanent friends, but there is a permanent interest. And what is that interest? You will not pretend to go into diplomacy or to in partnership with somebody that you do not have anything to offer. And therefore, countries will align with you according to what you have. And I think that this is actually one of the things that Samia should develop as her own external policy. That in Tanzania, Tanzania should develop its tourism potentials. And that Tanzania should develop mechanize its agriculture. Tanzania should try to discover the rich undersoil potentials that they have. So that tomorrow, any country that wants to come to Tanzania or any country that wants partnership with Tanzania, it should not be that it is only about talking about giving aid to Tanzania each time. Giving aid to Tanzania each time, it should be the fact that the country is coming because it is coming to collaborate in terms of exchange of goods and services. This is creating value to Tanzania. And that the Zambia should not make Tanzanian youth, for example, begin to develop that urge to follow the dangerous route in the desert to go to Europe. And rather, that Tanzania should be a new destination for Africans and Europeans and Americans to come there.
I think that is already happening. We just need to portray Africa the right way.
That's right.
Because I think during a documentary where you saw Samia herself taking the journalists all through Tanzania, discovering the destination, the beauty of the country, it actually portrays how beautiful the continent is. And I think with a change in mindset, we'll be able to look at the treasures of the continent, valorize the treasures, and work towards
just one thing, Clarice, just a
areas.
single thing. When we were growing up, we learned in history books or in geography about Mount Kilimanjaro. Do you know about that? And this do you know how, I mean, there was that age for some of us to be able to one day discover that Mount Kilimanjaro that is found in Tanzania. And up to today, that's a rich touristic potential. And we grew up today, and very little you know about some of those potentials, because there is this tendency of shielding the good things that we have in Africa and only portray what is in Europe. I remember recently there was this condemnation of most documentaries that your colleague journalists, they do, and that most of those documentaries, which are sponsored by Europe and America, is only to give a dark picture of Africa. They never show the good part of Africa. And today we have started giving a new narrative to that, and you journalists have to do your job.
Absolutely. Yes. Doing our job, and the platform Global Insight is here doing the job for Africa, writing Africa's history, the African way, looking at the loopholes and seeing how to cement while contextualizing and putting the dictates of the new world order into play. And it comes down towards how the political candidates in Tanzania with you, Professor Michael, it's about the mindset, because a politics or a political scope that helps to put the politicians in position of leadership for personal interest, and which fails to educate a population to understand the treasures of a country, what needs to be protected, and so on and so forth. It becomes very problematic. So this is another challenge for candidates contesting the presidency of Tanzania come October 29. What is your perspective as per this aspect of helping to educate not just the population, not just with manifestos that will talk about, economic development, but ensuring that it brings about a reawakening or maybe a new mindset that will set the people towards the right trajectory that will protect the integrity of the country?
I think by and large, a lot has changed, because even when we were talking about Mount Kilimanjaro sometime back, people used to think it was in the neighboring country when it is in Tanzania.
Yeah.
Now people know, and a lot has been done to popularize a lot of these tourist attractions, not only for the international market but also domestically, because a lot of Tanzanians are increasingly going to these places. But what I can say, one of the answers, because if we go back to the 1990s, we used to have what they used to call the stowaway problem in Tanzania, when youth used to believe that going to Europe is their passport to heaven. But now that has since changed, particularly after the changes that were made in the late 1990s and from 2000 upwards. But there's also a lot that has been done, because besides agriculture, whether we like it or not. Tanzania was for a long time known as an agricultural country. Now tourism is contributing, I don't know, I don't have the figures with me, a lot to the GDP, and it's still growing. And a lot, I have my friends who are doing research in trying to see how they can harness tourism in a comprehensive and also eco-friendly manner to make sure that the country reaps dividends from that. And also, while doing that, make sure that the local population, particularly the youth, benefit from that. So there's a lot that is going on in there. And when we also talk about the mineral sector, we realize that Tanzania now is no longer just an agricultural country, but is also emerging as a giant in the mining sector. And those are some of the policies that need to be solved, not only to the country, but also to other countries. And also, we also put into context within Pan-Africanism, when we are united, we are strong. When we look at individual African countries, we see that their markets are very, very small. But when you look at the East African bloc, when you look at the SADC bloc, when you look at the West African bloc, and you bring them together, you find that the market grows. And when these countries speak with one voice, when they speak with one voice beyond just the lip service under African Union, you can find that we will also be able to be such a force and such an economic force that people they will also respect. And I think because Tanzania has been Pan-African, because if you look at its role in the frontline states, if you look at its role in the East African region, if you look at its role in trying to make sure that the country collaborates with others, you find that you cannot question its standing in the international or Pan-African spirit. So what needs to be done is to see how the youth and other members of the society can be brought on board so that they can continue building that spirit and make sure that even as we go beyond October 29th, our country remains strong, our country remains united, our country continues with dialogue by including even those who are currently not taking part in the elections. Because if we continue dialogue, we continue building, and we continue working on the Pan-African spirit, what that has created an identity that has made many nations in the neighboring countries feel Tanzania is a safe haven. Then we'll continue building that spirit. I think it's important to keep that in mind. It's not like we're not doing anything. We are doing a lot to try to build that reality within the emerging opportunities in the Pan-Africanism. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. It can all be seen in the road network linking Tanzania to other countries across Africa. Not to mention about forget about the port that is also ensuring not just continental trade but global trade. And of course, now it brings us. We are almost culminating, and that is why during elections period and even the era of campaigning, it is always imperative to try to bring people into understanding so that we do not derail from what is imperative at this juncture. And that is why in our introduction, Pasika Farameli, this question is directed to you. We talked about moving from politics of persuasion to politics of power or interest strategically. Now, how can we, with the precepts of Pan-Africanism and the fact that Tanzania is already a very peaceful country, we could hear Professor Michael highlighting Avata. That is one thing that I enjoy in the country. So how can now we educate our politicians during their campaign periods to ensure that they do not use persuasion to mislead our population and put the entire continent in a state of dilemma.
Thank you, Clarice. Um, I'm not sure how you're going to do that because I think it is human nature to want to be greedy, to want to be selfish, and to want to not release power. So it becomes very difficult for us to say, how do we then persuade those who are in power or those who want to retain power to avoid persuading the population? So that is very important and yet very difficult to answer as a question. I would like to argue that Tanzania, being a relatively free and not so combative country with internal issues, I think that I would like to argue that we just need to sustain the status quo. Prof, I believe, has been emphasizing that this is a country that's on a trajectory. And if you read in the studies, you see the potential that is there for Tanzania, whether we are still here or we are not here, but in the future for Tanzania to be a very successful country. But there are things that are enabling in an environment, and that is specifically things that we spoke to at the start of this engagement. Or I always use the example of the United States because we would like to make the mistake that these are African problems and only limited to the context of Africa. But we look at what happened in the United States. It doesn't matter how they try to juggle it, how they try to politicize it, and how they try to lie. But the United States was almost in the space of a civil war and a coup. We were on the edge of something like that happening in January 6th. We've seen what just happened in Moldova. This is a European country. This is a country that says that the elections are free, democratic. These are elections that are free and they are standardized. But we know, we can clearly see the signs that there's a lot of interferences that are happening in there. So the reason why I'm pointing out the American example, the North American example specifically, and the South African example and the European example is to say that elections are a very complex thing. But you want countries that have successfully and consistently been able to perform them very well and with leadership that seems as though it has a huge backing and support to continue doing the same thing and to support to continue doing the same thing and to continuously support those who are around that leadership, or those who contest that leadership, not necessarily to contest it, but for the elections to be free and fair at the end of the day. So at the end of the day, Clarice, I think I did not necessarily speak to your question because I think it's a very difficult question because of human nature and how humans function. But I do think that it is essential for us to keep in mind that in order for us to continue what we have, because the continent has had enough bloodshed, the continent has had a lot of problems, and we know a lot of them have been influenced from the outside. We do not need anything like that ever again moving forward. We have so much potential, but because of the greed of men, it becomes very difficult to speak specifically to the issue of control. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that, Clarice. Thank you very much.
Very disturbing reports patterning Tanzania on the net, and it is internet. I beg your pardon. It is imperative to try to understand from our own perspectives and want to give put the stakes into context. we are rounding off for a concluding statement from you, Professor Michael, as we run off with this program that focuses on the event leading up to the October 29 elections in the East African nation of Tanzania. What is that message that you continue to send out to the eligible candidates as they continue to crisscross the nations win candidates for the elections?
I think the message is that they have to be open with their manifesto. They have to be open with the people that they address. They have to be open with the electorate so that their uh, manifesto are clear and convince the people that they are voting for the right candidate. Without doing that, which means they will be shortchanging the electorate. But we are at a point where using various media, whether now, of course, it's the most effective way, radio, which reaches the entire country, they need to use that to communicate their message so that people, the electorate, the young, the youth, the women, and also children can vote while well informed about their policies and what they need to do. I think that is very important. Then, as a way forward, there is also a need to continue with the dialogue. And I think the solution is supposed to be within us, without, without external interference. Because once external interference comes in, then it ruins everything because it becomes deficit. But we want to cherish and we want to continue and remain united. That's the most important thing. And that is the message that must be sent home to everyone. Thank you.
Okay, remain united. I'll come back to you, Pasaka Faramali, for your concluding statement, particularly on the aspect of protecting the national integrity or security or interest ahead of the elections.
That is essential. That is essential, Clarice. As I said, relatively peaceful countries that have not really suffered from external manipulation, whether it's European, American from the West, or from within the continent, they need to be supported as much as humanly possible, and that is very important because these are countries that can lead by example. And I think that's why we have had a lot of chatter around the country of Senegal because for many years it was recognized as one of the most peaceful countries with a lot of potential in the continent. But we knew that there was some external manipulation that was happening if the West is recognizing them as such. But countries such as Tanzania, I do believe that these are countries that have the potential to lead the continent. You have leaders who have shown themselves as possible lights of the continent. We are speaking to leaders who will actually follow the ideas, ideologies of Pan Africanism to its core. And as I always maintain, whenever we are having these discussions and these discourses, that is not going to be easy, but it is something that is doable. It's not easy to do, it is not easy to envision, but it is very doable. It's just a matter of initiative and willingness and wanting for things of that nature to actually be seen, to come true. And I think that is why I always make sure to balance this point of our potential with these ideas of greed that come from nationalism, nationalistic or centering yourself within your nation, not outside, specifically in the continent. I think that is something that is very key that we need to speak to because we have so many leaders in the continent. When the population says they have these pan-Africanist ideas and ideologies that they'd like to follow, these leaders cannot allow them to follow those because it would mean that their power and control would be compromised. I do hope that this is not something that we will see a repeat of in Tanzania. It is essential for us to make sure that the country of Tanzania does not move backwards but move forward, because the more successful countries we have with actual leaders who have potential or who show potential that they can take the country somewhere, the more we are closer to this dream and vision that we have of a Pan-African continent. And I do know that it's far-fetched. It is a distance from now. It is a distance away. But I think with leaders that we are currently seeing on the rise, specifically in cases of the Sahel, we might actually see ourselves moving somewhere that we envision that we should eventually end at. I thank you. I thank you, Clarice, and I thank my panel.
Thank you so much, Paseka Farumali. And we crown it all with you, Dr. Michael Demantur. It is imperative when we talk elections, we also talk communication and information, and that is the role of the media. And with your concluding statement, how do you think, because the media at this moment has to play that role of a watchdog to ensure that there is no infiltration and that there is no disinformation around areas or during times like this. We remember a case of Cameroon where we had fake observers presenting a very negative atmosphere of the presidential elections in Cameroon. A situation happened in Russia as well, in the Donbass, and I was part of the a mission in the Donbass, and they cited where actually observed elections. You saw disturbing reports of people being forced to vote at gunpoint, and then you see how this infiltration is actually broad. It covers a whole lot of areas, and the media is one of those factors or points where there is almost always that infiltration. So what is the take-home message as authorities in Tanzania continue to put things together to ensure that these elections go successfully?
Of course, my last word would be that, like in Tanzania, like in any other country, especially Africa, they should put the media and media practitioner on the scanner. Let me tell you, most of all of these things that infiltrate the country, they infiltrate with the complicity of the media and the media practitioners, because most of these organizations that get in, they are credibilized by the media. They are authenticated by the media. The stories are written by the media. Because when you look at it all, to actually, their indelible marks are left by the media, and it is the media that tell the story. And what I ask the media practitioners to do is, especially now in Tanzania, is to be patriotic. Let them know that every act that they commit at this particular moment in time is an act that can either mar or fix the country. And if they are patriotic, they will always look for those positive things that they can project about the country. A country is not in the external world by the media, and that is why when they push the government to the wall and the government start censoring them, they begin to cry foul. It is because most media houses and organs have sold the country out even before any other thing. They sell the country out. They give different narratives about the country because of their personal aggrandizement, because of their selfishness, because they want to be able to make big selfishly at the detriment of the country. And therefore, I think that the media plays a very, very preponderant role in every country. And every media practitioner should be moralized, should be educated, to know that the first issue that they have to do is to serve the country. And that is why I always ask that the government should be able to canalize the work of the media. Canalizing is different from censoring them. Meaning that what? To canalize in first place is also to keep them comfortable. Because sometimes most of these media practitioners, because of their miserable conditions, they go and do funny things. And I think that if their employers are able to keep them well, and that's why there needs to be regulations on this, and that journalists too should be well paid, so that they don't go on giving negative impressions about their country. When they go looking for food, and the quest for looking for food, they go committing acts, and some of these acts are very detrimental to the country. And therefore, at this very crucial moment in Tanzania, I enjoin the media that we want to enjoy the beauty of the election. The beauty of election in this country that is very historic, and we have very good memories about the country, and that to enjoy this country and this moment of election, it is the media to feed us with. And please don't feed us with poison from Tanzania. Feed us with good food, not junk food, but real natural food that we have in Africa.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure,
Food,
we are going
of course, it's
exactly.
a peaceful atmosphere, and it is obviously from what Professor Michael highlighted, and the calmness in which he spoke, you could already tell that peace in Tanzania is actually embedded in the people themselves, and it actually brings us again, ladies and gentlemen, to the end of today's edition of the program that focused on the defining moments of Tanzania. It's not just about elections or maybe political wrangling among the potential contenders, but also ensuring that we redefine the political scope of a country, case study being Tanzania for today, to meet to meet the dictate of a multipolar world, to ensure, because of the global shift, we also ensure that there is need to protect national interests. And as politicians are being urged to move from politics of persuasion to politics of strategic power and interest, it is also imperative for other stakeholders, be it the civil society, the media, and any other stakeholders being very important in decision making that would define the future of our nation, to be more intentional and contextualize ideologies to suit the present needs of the people. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for your time. And also thank you to the technical crew. We apologize for the interruptions, but we hope to meet you subsequently as we continue to bring forth questions or topics of utmost importance to help to educate the population towards taking the right decision. Thank you.
This program was brought to you by Globals.